So I've had a lot of issues finishing this video because it keeps getting blocked. At this point, it's very probable that in the best case scenario, they'll just put ads all over the video, but I ended up having to do a lot of dumb edits that I wouldn't have normally liked doing. So if you see something that looks wonky, I'm sorry. I didn't really have a say in the matter.
This video was brought to you by my patrons. Thanks! Content warning. Many of you may have clicked on this video knowing I've touched on this subject matter before in previous videos. I know many of you particularly liked the Jojo Rabbit video, so I want to make it very clear that in that video I had the distinct pleasure of talking about Jews who lived. That is not going to be the case in this video for the most part. In this video, I will be talking about Jews who died, and I'm going to discuss the intricacies and inner workings of Auschwitz-Birkenau and the mechanics of what was called the final solution. I don't know how to warn for that, but there's going to be a lot of unpleasant details. Please take care of yourself, and if you are not emotionally prepared to hear about those things, then click away now. So, for those of you still watching, for those of you who clicked on this thumbnail, I suspect some of you might be like, wow, she's talking about Holocaust movies again? She talks about the Holocaust too much. First off, don't say that to a Jew, that's rude. But the reason I keep returning to this subject matter is twofold. Number one, Jewish representation is, by and large, somewhere between abysmal and just okay, depending on who you ask. For me personally, it's not great. I wish there were more shows like Russian Doll, Unorthodox, or Undone. I really do. But the fact is, I don't like Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I think Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is a mess. Films like Shiva Baby and Disobedience are excellent and interesting, but they didn't stick with me. I mean, there's Fiddler on the Roof and Prince of Egypt. Both are unassailable classics, but I don't actually have much more to say about them other than, these are good, go watch them. What I want from Jewish representation is difficult to nail down, but it's more than waving a menorah around or a joke at the expense of religiously observant Jews or a punchline reveal of X character being Jewish.
I meant I can't see you anymore because you're not Jewish.
You're Jewish. Yeah. Which is cool.
And with these particular preferences of mine, where I want to see interesting depictions of Jewish characters that actively engage with our culture instead of just paying lip service to it, that frequently leads me to Holocaust films. The second reason I'm talking about this subject matter again is because people keep saying dumb shit everywhere all of the time, and so I find myself in a position to try and educate from a Jewish perspective with the hope and prayer that people might actually listen. Of course, because I am once again going to mostly focus on Jewish victims, here's some recommendations for films and info on other affected populations. For Romani people, I recommend Corcoro, and if you can track it down, there's also the film And the Violin Stopped Playing. For queer people, I recommend Bent. And yes, I'm saying queer because 1940s Germany didn't exactly have a great understanding of sex and gender. There were absolutely trans women and non-binary people who were imprisoned and killed, but I do not know the numbers on that. Also, David Bradley's excellent video on Cabaret has more information on queer victims if you want to learn more. And for black folks, I recommend this excellent interview with a black survivor of a German labor camp. And these were not the only affected groups. Disabled people were often targeted, little people, giant folk. Anybody who didn't fit with Nazi Germany's idea of a pure race was supposed to die. But they didn't. Not all of them, at least. It is thanks to the honesty of survivors that we have stories like The Gray Zone. Now let's talk about it. I want to begin with the words of Zalmen Gradowski, written in Auschwitz-Birkenau in the fall of 1944. Come here to me, you fortunate citizens of the world, who live in a land where happiness, joy, and pleasure still exist, and I will tell you how vile modern-day criminals have turned people's happiness to misery, their joy to perpetual grief, and forever destroyed their contentment. Come here to me, you free citizen of the world, in which your life is safeguarded by human morality, and your existence guaranteed by law, and I will tell you how those modern-day criminals and vile brigands have trampled on the morality of life and annihilated the law of existence. Come now, while the massacre is still at its height. Come now, while the destruction still rages. Come now, while the angel of death still has dominion. Come now, while the ovens and pyres are still blazing. Come, arise, do not wait for the flood to abate, the sky to clear and the sun to begin to shine, for then you will stand amazed and will not believe what your eyes are seeing. And who knows whether, with the ebbing flood, those who could be living witnesses and tell you the truth will not also disappear. Zalmen asked whoever read his words to come with him to see the truth, to look it in the eye, as painful as that may be. Zalmen Gradowski was a member of the Auschwitz Sonderkommando. In Tim Blake Nelson's book, The Gray Zone, Director's Notes and Screenplay, he describes the Sonderkommando as such. Those unluckiest of death camp inmates offered the most impossible bargain humanity could propose to itself. These Jewish males were told quite simply that they could either help out in the extermination of their fellows or be shot. They cleaned the gas chambers, burned the corpses of those murdered, and ushered fellow Jews to slaughter. They did so in 12 to 15-hour shifts for periods of up to 4 months before being exterminated themselves and replenished with a new group. The Gray Zone is a 2001 film from Tim Blake Nelson, who is probably best known for his acting in films like Holes, O Brother, Where Art Thou, and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. But he is also a writer and director. He's written and directed films like Eye of God from 1997, Leaves of Grass from 2009, and Anesthesia from 2015, as well as The Gray Zone. He also directed the modern Othello adaptation O from 2001. The film The Gray Zone is primarily based on Dr. Miklós Nyiszli's first-hand account, which was published in 1946 under the title Auschwitz, A Doctor's Eyewitness Account. Dr. Nyiszli was a Hungarian Jew who found himself working under Joseph Mengele, participating in his various medical atrocities, largely in the form of autopsies and dissections of twin children. It should be noted that he did not knowingly volunteer for the work. He thought he was volunteering for a hospital, but he also didn't stop doing the work once he understood what was being asked of him, since the alternative was death.
I have to say that I didn't fully understand how to read Nyiszli until I'd read Drowned in the Saved. Primo Levi really contextualizes Nyiszli in such a beautifully provocative and sensitive way.
One more major influence on the Gray Zone was the writings of Jewish-Italian chemist and Holocaust survivor Primo Levi. Primo Levi was born in 1919 in Turin, Italy. He joined the Italian resistance movement to try and fight the Nazis in 1943, but he was eventually caught and arrested by them. He was sent to Auschwitz in February 1944, where he would survive through the liberation of Auschwitz in January 1945. From 1946 until his death, he wrote prolifically, not only memoirs of his own experiences, but also essays and short stories. He died in April of 1987, a year after finishing his final book, The Drowned and the Saved. While his death was officially ruled as a suicide, there are some who believe his death was simply an accident. And his writings were instrumental to the central thesis of the film, as well as providing the film's title. Primo Levi described the murky gulf between victim and oppressor in The Drowned and the Saved as the Gray Zone. The plot of The Gray Zone follows Dr. Nyiszli and a group of Sonderkommando who were attempting an uprising within the camp. The Auschwitz-Birkenau prisoner revolt of October 7, 1944 in real life destroyed 2 of the 4 crematoriums in Birkenau with gunpowder that was smuggled to them by women from the munitions factory. The opening text of the film states, "This film addresses true events surrounding the 12th largely Hungarian Sonderkommando at Auschwitz II Birkenau." And with that text, it is made clear there are liberties being taken for the sake of drama while still trying to convey truths. The Gray Zone, and this book along with it, does not pretend to be a historical document. Rather, it's meant to strike at the essence of the predicament faced by the Sonderkommandos, Nelson said. In fact, frequent comparisons have been made between The Grey Zone and the 2015 film Son of Saul. Both are based to some degree on Dr. Nyiszli's account following the October 7th revolt and the brief survival of a child from the gas chambers. But for me personally, I found The Grey Zone to be far more impactful for several reasons, including The Grey Zone's attempts to cleave to the reality of events as we know them. Whereas Son of Saul is far more concerned with an impressionistic, more fictionalized interpretation of the same events. It's still a fine film and one I recommend, but I do find The Grey Zone to be more compelling. Another note that needs to be made is that Dr. Nyiszli's account does differ in some small ways from first-hand accounts of the surviving Sonderkommandos. Not in like a massive defamatory way, but he wasn't a part of the Sonderkommando, and some details seem a bit off because of that. For instance, The Grey Zone and Dr. Nyiszli's account state quite concretely that the Sonderkommando were killed every 4 months, but this is a fact that seemed to vary. Shlomo Venezia was told they were killed every 3 months, although he survived 8, while Filip Müller survived 3 years. In Amidst a Nightmare of Crime, Kazimierz Smolen, a Polish political prisoner who survived Auschwitz, said, "In order to get rid of eyewitnesses of crimes committed by themselves, the Nazis liquidated from time to time part of the Sonderkommando and selected prisoners anew from fresh transports to take the place of the liquidated ones. When liquidating members of Sonderkommando, experts, so to speak, were left alive. That is, capos and stokers who tended the crematoria ovens." Beyond that, it seems to be largely down to luck and the fickle nature of the SS who survived and who was killed and at what interval. And when the Sonderkommando were liquidated, they were usually lied to about it. They were told they were getting transported, reassigned, or sent on a reprieve. And most of the literature on the Sonderkommandos doesn't lay it out the same way as Dr. Nyiszli or the former Sonderkommando who wrote the foreword to Nyiszli's book, Bruno Bettelheim. They specify that it was the 12th Sonderkommando unit of 13 who rose up. Most of the other accounts don't describe them in numbered units. But I should also state here, I'm not a historian. I just read a bunch of books for this video. They're listed in my sources. When addressing the film, I will stick to Nyiszli and the film's terminology with the 12th of 13 Sonderkommando units. Another minor discrepancy is the numbering of crematoriums 1 through 4 in Birkenau. Most accounts number them as crematoriums 2 through 5, since there was a smaller crematorium that had been built in Auschwitz before they built Birkenau as an extension of Auschwitz. But Nyiszli, along with former Sonderkommando Daniel Bennahmias, called them crematoriums 1 through 4. The film follows that same numbering system, which was a deliberate choice on Nelson's part to stick with what had been written in Nyiszli's book. So with that, let's do the rundown. The Grey Zone actually first began life as a play, also written by Tim Blake Nelson, directed by Douglas Hughes.
His concept, which was encouraged by me, but very much his concept, was minimal set design and an implied reality achieved with light and sound.
Then, after Nelson worked on Terrence Malick's Thin Red Line, he began to consider how the Grey Zone might work on film.
I suddenly realized, well, the way to do Grey Zone as a movie is to take the opposite approach of what had been done on stage, which was, in a sense, to show everything, but never in a gratuitous way, rather as a matter-of-fact way. That it was so present and the apparatus was so casually deployed, and in every scene almost, that it became banal.
Now, the film stars Alan Corduner as Dr. Miklós Nyiszli. Corduner was kind enough to answer a few questions via email about the film, and he said when playing complex historical figures like Dr. Nyiszli,
one, of course, is anxious to do their memory justice, but this is of necessity based on a combination of facts and emotional instincts based on one's knowledge of that person. There must be no judgment.
He also added that Nyiszli was described by his own account as a bit of a chain smoker, and so Corduner, a former smoker who hadn't touched a cigarette in 21 years, took up smoking again for the part, and it took him 5 years to quit. You might recognize Alan Corduner from other films like Defiance or Topsy-Turvy, but his quiet, understated horror while playing Nyiszli is masterful. Opposite him, as one of the other named historical figures, is Harvey Keitel playing Oberscharführer Erich Musfeld. He's a figure that is mentioned in a few sources, from Dr. Nyiszli's account to the deposition of Stanislaw Jankowski contained in Amidst a Nightmare of Crime. And notably, he's a Jewish actor portraying a Nazi.
And Harvey Keitel didn't want to play a Jew. And so people have said, why did he play the German? And I don't regret that either. There was nobody more zealous in pursuit of making something extraordinary over there among the acting corps than Harvey.
Alan Corduner spoke of his commitment to the part, saying,
Harvey Keitel had decided as a method actor not to talk or interact between takes with anybody playing a Jew. This included me, and though I respected his choice, it made it hard that all discussion about the 33 pages of scenes between our two characters, 1/3 of the entire movie, could only be discussed through a third party, Tim Blake Nelson, the writer-director. This added yet another layer of concentration.
And based on his performance in the film, I would guess Keitel wanted to portray the complexity of an oppressor, not as some larger-than-life figure, but as a pathetic, mundane man who happened to have power over the lives of millions. That is the character we see in the film, and seemingly a very apt portrayal based on Nyiszli's account. After him, there are the Sonderkommando, who, while not based on specific historical figures, are something of an amalgamation based on various writings. First, there's Hoffman, played by David Arquette. Hoffman is a character who is at once the most gentle and seemingly vulnerable. He's also the closest to breaking under the weight of what he's experiencing. David Arquette plays him beautifully, and is probably best known for his work in the Scream films playing Dewey Riley. I remember him best for the character Randy Man in Pushing Daisies. Then there is, frankly, my favorite character in the film, Rosenthal, played by David Chandler. David Chandler is an actor with an incredibly sparse IMDb page. He does a lot of audiobook narration these days, and the fact that he didn't have a bigger career is a travesty. He is heart-wrenching in this film as the fiery Rosenthal. His character is so full of anger at everything with no place to put it, but it's always there in every scene. I just think he's mesmerizing to watch. Then there's Abramovitz, played by Steve Buscemi. Steve Buscemi you probably know for films like Reservoir Dogs or The Big Lebowski or shows like Boardwalk Empire. He's an excellent, prolific actor, and he shines in this small role as the go-between for two sects of the commandos planning the uprising. There's Schlermer, played by Daniel Benzali. Schlermer is a bit of a leader amongst the commandos, someone who is generally listened to amongst the other men. Benzali is another character actor who infuses the role with a stony stoicism that is really interesting to see. Also, you might spot a young Michael Stuhlbarg in the minor role of Cohen. This was one of his first film roles. He played Hoffman in the original play. Then there are the women of the Unio factory. Rosa, played by Natasha Lyonne, is an homage to the real Rosa Roboda, one of close to 30 women who smuggled gunpowder to the Sonderkommando. She was discovered by the SS and executed along with 3 other women. Then there's Dina, played by Mira Sorvino, and Anya, played by Lisa Benavides. None of them are in the film for long, but they still leave quite an impact. Lyonne's Rosa is harsh and determined, Dina is resigned and stubborn, and Anya seems to be the most naive and afraid amongst them. Lastly, there is the girl, played by Kamila Grigorova. The young girl doesn't get a name and doesn't speak. Kamila actually showed up with her mother as potential extras for the film, but Nelson had been struggling to find the right young actress for the part.
And I was walking by and I saw this face and I said, my God, she is it. And so I had this wonderful translator who was also my assistant. And I put the girl, Camellia, through a series of Mike Lee acting exercises to find out if she could effectively be herself in front of a camera. And she was lovely. Everybody loved her, got along so well with her, and her mother was wonderful. It was great.
Grigorova has not gone on to act in other films, but for this one part, she was perfect. So now, let's talk about...
So I'm a liar.
You're what you are.
With this film, writer-director Tim Blake Nelson set out to tell a human story that would constantly upend expectations while remaining completely understated. In his director's notes, he said, "In its storytelling and acting styles, this film will never try to be liked. If it seems to be doing so, given the clear aesthetic presented by the script, we failed." This film employs several stylistic touches that are so specific and distinct from any other Holocaust film I've ever seen.
The idea was, don't do the accents because that's what you always see, and it allows people to say, oh, that was then and those people. I want the audience to feel like they're in the middle of it. And I'm an American filmmaker using American actors, so I'm going to let these American actors speak the way they speak.
A big stylistic choice that many will notice while watching the film is the accents. Most of the characters in the film speak in American accents, the only exception being the Nazi characters, who speak English with a German accent.
They think we're going to kill them.
Don't you always?
This is the kind of theatrical device one might find on stage, but rarely on film, and I kind of like it.
And I thought, well, I have license not to make these people sound like my European Jewish relatives, which is what most characters in Holocaust films sound like. And that's meant to connote a kind of Jewishness, but also to imply that they're speaking in another language. And so I thought, well, when we're speaking in our own language, we don't speak in an accent, and so that's sort of silly.
He said he hoped to achieve a sort of universality with this approach, an immediacy that would allow an American audience to identify with these European Jewish characters.
And ultimately, I was making the film for people like me, an American audience. I didn't think so much about the film's appeal worldwide. And it's been interesting to see what countries have responded to it and what countries haven't.
He even purposefully chose more generic Jewish names like Hoffman and Rosenthal rather than choosing more Hungarian names like Nyiszli or Radnoti.
I hope that by my universalizing the names to make them basic Jewish names, that would allow for the audience to identify more with the characters. I guess they're names from the Pale.
And along with the accents is the dialogue itself, which is, I think, one of my favorite elements of the film.
We found a stupid link.
So what's the trouble?
You don't walk out of there every day.
I do plenty more than that.
This isn't a contest.
Then don't make it one.
It's so quick and rhythmic. Even if the content of it is very dark, there's a lightness in the speed of its delivery that I find very engaging.
They never non-coms. Do you hear this? You don't even speak German.
German? What the fuck does that matter? I speak enough, and I speak Yiddish. I heard from
Yiddish.
With a subject matter as difficult as this, you need some lightness, and I think that comes from the style of the dialogue, which was inspired by playwright Carol Churchill.
And you have characters interrupting one another at specific times. You can also make a kind of rhythmic poetry out of the language. And it's incredibly cold, and it's incredibly dry, and it's always ahead of the audience so that you're having to catch up. You don't understand what characters are talking about, but because of the confidence in the way that the performances are delivered and the precision of the words, you're sent signals by the piece itself that eventually you will understand, and that you have to have confidence in the people that are telling the story. And so that's basically the way the dialogue is supposed to work in the movie, and I really owe that to Carol Churchill.
And of course, as that statement might imply, this film has a total lack of exposition beyond the opening text at the beginning, which explains who the Sonderkommando and Dr. Nyiszli were and where they were. From then on, the movie just goes and expects us to follow along.
I worked very hard in the gray zone never to have exposition. So characters always speak with an understood reality. And then the movie also leans on the audience's understanding of the Holocaust so that it can go deeper into the apparatus of killing because it understands that the audience already knows the basics of the Holocaust.
This forces us as an audience to lean in to try and keep up with what's being said and what's actually being communicated in any given scene. It forces us to infer and connect this with what knowledge we are bringing to the film. I imagine every audience member might have a slightly different experience watching this film because of that, but I think it's a fascinating approach to a historical piece. I just love the writing of the film, and I love the moments when the dialogue hits you with a breathtaking moment of layered meanings.
Did I say kill?
We both know what we're saying.
So I'm a liar.
You're what you are.
There's even moments of pitch black humor in the film that do make me laugh.
I'd like a bottle of that wine.
Give us the necklace.
Come on.
It's good wine, you fucking yet.
So you're alive, we're all alive, we're all shitting gold, make your point.
And between the dialogue scenes, we are treated to matter-of-fact shots of the burning chimneys or a truck full of ashes that we know are human ashes. It's not designed to shock an audience, but rather present us with an unadorned reality. And through that blunt, unemotional style, I think it delivers a far greater impact than many films I've seen. So now, let's talk about the story. After that brief bit of expository text, the gray zone drops us into the lives of the Sonderkommando in No. 1 crematorium in October 1944. The film opens on a shot of Hoffman, just standing there. We don't know what he's just seen or where he's just been, but there's an unspeakable horror written across his features. And then, to further throw us off kilter, an SS officer asks if he has anything to drink.
The unlikeliness of it is meant to instruct the audience, this is a world turned completely upside down from what you think is true about what went on in the camps. And therefore, the first moment is laced with implied complicity.
From there, Hoffman walks through the halls of this bunker until he reaches a room. In that room, we meet Rosenthal and Schlermer calmly making a decision that we do not have the full context for yet.
Cover his head anyway.
Do as he says.
There's an old man lying in his bed. He's not quite dead, but they're acting like he is. Hoffman shows up with a doctor to revive the man, but the other two say he's already dead.
Sir, he's dead. Sir, he's dead.
He's alive. He's alive. I'm treating him.
The doctor injects the man with something to revive him, and then Rosenthal smothers the old man with a pillow.
No! Please, no! Please!
Easy now, old friend. Easy.
We watch a murder happen in the most matter-of-fact way possible. When it's done, the doctor is upset.
Don't come for me anymore. Don't knock at my door.
But the other two are completely calm.
That's easy.
And, after all that, Hoffman carries the body downstairs to be burned. That is the beginning of the film. From there, we get scenes where the Sonderkommandos speak in hushed tones about plans for the uprising and the potential for their own survival.
Every day counts. They've been on just as long as we have. Longer. They could go before us. I don't understand him.
You're dead already. Either way, it's just a matter of deciding how.
And between those scenes, we get unsettling sequences like the truck filled with human ash driving past an incongruously well-manicured lawn, or a line of new arrivals being walked into the gas chambers while the Auschwitz band plays the chipper-sounding Roses from the South by Johann Strauss. A truly ironic choice, given Germany chose to ignore Strauss's Jewish heritage and claim him as one of the great German composers. In one scene, Oberscharführer Musfeld tells Rosenthal and Hoffman that they're going to be moved soon.
Why do you want to do that?
They're seeking of a reprieve.
Rosenthal says they would like to remain here, that they would be happy to remain here.
Happy?
This is where we would like to remain. Why kill us now? We're the best commando you've had.
Did I say kill?
We both know what we're saying.
In the end, Musfeld claims it's not his decision, and then yells at the men to stay in their areas and get back to work. Then we jump to a scene between Dr. Nyiszli, the doctor from the first scene, and Joseph Mengele. Now, the film never once states that this man is the angel of death himself. As a historical figure, he's often been made larger than life, and Nelson wanted to avoid playing into such grandiose depictions.
I didn't want to name him on screen, and I specifically didn't want to make a big deal out of it because he's, at this point, such a trope in these movies, and I felt like not saying his name was the way to go.
For the first half of his only scene in the film, you barely even see his face as he praises Nyiszli's medical knowledge. And there's this moment where Mengele tells him they're going to be increasing the volume of their research, a euphemistic way of saying he'll be expected to perform autopsies on more children's bodies. And you can see the muted horror and then resignation play out across Nyiszli's eyes as he finally responds.
I shall need more staff.
Then you shall have more staff.
And then Nyiszli asks for the pass they spoke about, and Mengele gives it to him. In reality, this pass allowed him to see his wife and daughter in the women's camp and smuggle them supplies. And Mengele did give him that pass in real life. And then we see the women in the Union Munitions Factory in Brzezinska, often called the Unio Factory. The Unio was still part of the Auschwitz complex, and like many of the satellite locations of Auschwitz, employed Jewish prisoners as a form of slave labor. In other satellite locations, prisoners mined coal, made cement, repaired railroads, and various other sorts of construction or agricultural labor. In the film, we see Dina notably wearing a pink triangle. While it seems there is some debate about how and when Nazis persecuted lesbians, that was less common than the arresting and murders of gay men and trans women. Cisgender women and trans men were actually labeled with the black triangle in Auschwitz for antisocial behavior, aka not getting married and having Aryan babies. Confusingly, the black triangle was also the designation for Romani prisoners sometimes, but nonetheless, Dina is intended to be a Jewish lesbian.
It looks like she has on her uniform, I can't tell if it's a pink or a red triangle on her uniform. Was she meant to be a lesbian, or was it oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just a choice we made. It felt right to us, and yeah.
And honestly, for a film made in 2001, I'm delighted and astounded by the inclusion of a queer character. The film doesn't make a fuss about it, but she's here, and I think she's amazing. When we first meet Dina, we see she's being smuggled something by a woman she doesn't recognize. She asks where Tzipora is, and the woman doesn't answer. Later, we see her talking to Anya and Rosa, and they move the powder onto a sheet of paper that they can wrap up and hide. They talk about Tzipora getting taken, and Rosa insists that they move on.
This is a chain. You find another link.
Anya points out that their entire barracks will be punished if they're found out.
Of course the whole barracks will be punished. They'll be punished before they're killed, just like us. It's a fucking difference when you're dead anyway.
Then Rosa asks how many bodies are going into the morning cart, and Dina tells her 8.
Good. See, that's good. The more bodies, the better, get it?
What we later see is that they're smuggling the powder on the corpses of dead women. From there, we get a scene of an SS officer in a gas mask emptying a canister into a chimney and closing it. Distantly, we can hear the sound of screams. Then we get an unnervingly long shot of Schlomo standing at the end of a long hallway, half shrouded in darkness. He drinks and drinks and drinks. He wears rubber gloves and a thick apron like a butcher. Distantly, we can hear ventilation fans begin to run, and pressurized air moving. A generator powers up, and the sound of the factory is getting louder as we get closer. Finally, Rosenthal steps around the corner in a gas mask. He hands a mask to Schlomo, who puts it on and steps inside the room to get to work. All we can see inside the room is clothing hung up on the walls on numbered hooks. After this, we get a scene between Musfeld and Dr. Nyiszli. In it, Musfeld says he feels sorry for the opposition if Germany loses the war, because if Germany wins, they'll all be one people. Nyiszli casually observes,
There have been wars within your tribe. Rome, the Night of the Long Knives.
And Musfeld, in a moment of almost comical denial, states that was not a war.
That, of course, was a putsch. A putsch is not a war.
It's a kind of war.
It's a putsch.
Then Musfeld sits down and tells Nyiszli there are rumors of an uprising in Crematorium 3, an uprising that would involve all 4 crematoriums.
What would I know?
They think we're going to kill them.
Don't you always?
Nyiszli says they won't tell him about it because they don't trust him.
You're their doctor.
I'm their doctor, but they know what I do.
He tells Musfeld what he does is different from what they do, which is work under gunpoint. He says he won't tell them anything he doesn't believe.
That we'll let them live?
That you'll let any of us live.
Musfeld says what happens to them has nothing to do with him, and he asks Nyiszli to pass on any information he might hear from the Sonderkommando. Nyiszli doesn't respond, but instead observes that the headaches Musfeld has complained of might be due to the stress of the mass murders he is committing daily. This makes Musfeld very angry.
It's not your job to suggest.
All right.
If I get upset if my head aches, it's because I drink too much.
And fun fact, this conversation comes directly from Nyiszli's account.
I checked his blood pressure, took his pulse, listened to his heart with a stethoscope. His pulse rate was slightly high. I gave him my opinion. His condition was no doubt the result of the little job he had just performed in the furnace room. I had wanted to reassure him, but the result was just the opposite. He became indignant, got up and said, "Your diagnosis isn't correct. It doesn't bother me any more to kill 100 men than it does to kill 5. If I'm upset, it's merely because I drink too much." And so saying, he turned and walked away, greatly displeased.
Not long after this, we get our first real glimpse of inside the crematorium. A channel of bloody water runs along the ground, with bodies piled haphazardly around before they're shoved into the crematory ovens. Everything moves quickly, with a cold efficiency born of painful repetition. An SS officer shoves a man out into a hallway and shoots him. Nobody even reacts. Work continues apace. When discussing this film, one has to discuss the history of the Sonderkommando. The word Sonderkommando means special unit, or special squad, or special forces, depending on the translation. As previously stated, these were task forces the Nazis put together to do the dirty work of the camps. Many people talk about the morality of the work done by these men. By the nature of it, they were abetting the slaughter of their own people. There are stories of commandos fresh off the train being made to burn the bodies of their own families as part of their first day on the job, as it were. That was the job. They burned bodies, they guided largely Jewish prisoners into the gas chambers. They were sometimes tasked with dragging prisoners in front of SS officers so they could be shot and the bodies thrown in ditches to be burned. They even cleaned and whitewashed the gas chambers between each gassing, removing all traces of blood and excrement and covering up the scratches and gouges in the walls. And the only choice any Sonderkommando had was to do this work or die. And some did refuse.
At least 400 Greeks from the Corfu and Athens transport were ordered into the Sonderkommando. Now something truly unusual happened. These 400 demonstrated that in spite of the barbed wire and the lash, they were not slaves, but human beings. With rare dignity, the Greeks refused to kill the Hungarians. They declared that they preferred to die themselves first. Sadly enough, they did. The Germans saw to that. But what a demonstration of courage and character these Greek peasants had given. A pity the world doesn't know more about them.
Although it should be noted, all my research was pretty exclusively focused on the Auschwitz Sonderkommando. The SS had Sonderkommando units in other camps such as Belzec, Jelmino, Majdanek, Sobibor, and Treblinka. The October 7th uprising isn't even the first Sonderkommando revolt. The first was in Treblinka on August 2nd, 1943. They set buildings and a fuel tanker on fire and attacked the guards while attempting an escape. Of the 700 Sonderkommando who participated in the revolt, about 100 successfully escaped and about 70 survived the war. But most of my information is exclusively about the Auschwitz Sonderkommando, and so it may not uniformly apply to the experiences in other camps. But for the Auschwitz Sonderkommando, it should be noted, October 7th wasn't the first attempt at a revolt or an escape. Many individuals attempted escape and were hunted down and killed. And sometimes the Sonderkommando were killed before any large-scale plans came to fruition. In mid-December 1942, about 80 Sonderkommando were gassed and cremated, according to Philip Müller.
On removing their bodies from the gas chamber, we found on some of them scraps of scribbled paper with notes scribbled on them to the effect that their plan to escape had been betrayed by certain barrack orderlies.
Olga Lengyel, who was a go-between in the operation to smuggle gunpowder and other items between the Sonderkommando and the rest of the camp, said of the underground resistance within Auschwitz,
"Whoever fell was forgotten. We were not heroes and never claimed to be. We did not merit any congressional medals, Croix de Guerre, or Victoria Crosses. True, we undertook dangerous missions, but death and the so-called danger of death had a different meaning for us who lived in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Death was always with us, for we were always eligible for the daily selections. One nod might mean the end for any of us. To be late for roll call might mean only a slap in the face, or it might mean, if the SS became enraged, that he took out his Luger and shot you. As a matter of fact, the idea of death seeped into our blood. We would die anyway, whatever happened. We would be gassed, we would be burned, we would be hanged, or we would be shot. The members of the underground at least knew that if they died, they would die fighting for something."
Many of the commandos attempted suicide as well. Since the options were to do this work or die, many chose to try and take control of their own deaths. Dr. Nyiszli recounted one instance of aborting a suicide. Much like the one depicted in the opening scene of the film, the friends of the Sonderkommando told him not to save the man, to let him go his way.
Seeing that their arguments had had no effect and that I was preparing to inject the antidote, some of the men lost their tempers and spared no words as they had told me what they had thought of my action. Nevertheless, I finished the injections and left the room. Now that I was no longer beside his bed, now that his face no longer called forth to the doctor in me, the purely human side of my nature was forced to admit that the captain's friends had been right. I should have let him go his way, not in front of the cold steel barrel of a machine gun.
Much of the literature about the Sonderkommando discusses the work they did in exchange for better living conditions, for decent food and clothes, most of which was taken from incoming prisoners. But none of the commandos, as far as I can tell, willingly signed up to burn the corpses of their people and participate in what was called Sonderaction 1005 or Special Action 1005. This secret action was part of the Nazis' plan to hide all evidence of the genocide they were committing. As reports of the extermination began to reach Western powers, Action 1005 made use of prisoner labor from the concentration camp, mostly Jews, making them dispose of corpses after mass executions. The unfortunate effectiveness of Action 1005 is part of the reason many believe the Holocaust has been falsified, since so much of the evidence was purposefully destroyed. This was a major concern amongst the Sonderkommando. Once they were unwittingly brought into these units, it was very clear what they were doing. Bodies were burned, bones were ground into dust, ashes and dust were often poured into the Vistula River or used as fertilizer. Other contingents of the commandos were employed in equally grisly tasks. Some former dentists were employed to pull gold teeth from corpses. Those teeth were dropped into an acid which burned away the bone and left only the gold, which was then taken to smelters and melted down into ingots which could be used as currency. Then there were the barbers, who cut all the hair from the corpses. As a textile resource, it was not only used as insulation in clothing, as I had previously read, it was used in delayed action bombs, and it was used to stuff mattresses and cushions. According to Olga Lengyel's book, 5 Chimneys,
families of the Third Reich slept on the hair of its victims.
Part of why the Auschwitz Sonderkommando wanted to destroy the crematoriums was simply to destroy the mechanism the Nazis were using to hide their crimes. It wouldn't necessarily have stopped the killing, but destroying the crematoriums would still have put a wrench in the workings. It might have made it harder for them to continue to destroy every piece of evidence. It might have allowed word to get out about what was happening in the camps. At the end of Zalmen Gradowski's From the Heart of Hell is a letter where he writes, "Dear Finder, search everywhere, in every piece of ground. Buried in them are dozens of documents, mine and those of others, which shed light on all that has happened here. A great many teeth are buried here. We Sonderkommando workers deliberately scattered as many of them as we could over the whole area, so that the world would find actual traces of the millions murdered here. We ourselves have already lost hope of living until the liberation." Gradowski's writings were part of what has been named the Scrolls of Auschwitz, texts that were written by members of the Sonderkommando that were buried in the hopes that someday somebody would find them and learn what happened there. Among those whose writings were found, there was Gradowski, along with Salman Leuenthal, Chaim Hermann, and a letter from an unknown author. These texts are rare in that they are some of the only writings we have that were written by the Sonderkommando contemporaneously during their imprisonment. Most memoirs and first-hand accounts come after the event, with time and distance allowing some perspective and ordering of one's thoughts. But these texts are often scattered, repeating ideas and thoughts, jumping from one subject to another. It's heartbreaking to read, and much of these writings were compiled in the book Amidst a Nightmare of Crime. Nelson cites the book as an influence on the Sonderkommando characters, particularly Rosenthal and Hoffman.
It's so self-lacerating. And the character of Hoffman is really inspired by one of them. And then also the character of Rosenthal, who's so fucking impatient. Those two guys are just completely out of that.
Even more heartbreaking is that time was not kind to the scrolls. Some of them, once they were found, were so damaged they were nearly impossible to read or translate.
Because just pieces of the page are missing, and so you have missing words. And in the text, you have ellipses wherever words are missing. And it makes it even more heartbreaking. It's like somebody receding from you in the deepest sort of confession, and you're trying to hang on to their every word. And they're trying to hang on to you through the confession, and yet they're just receding. And that's Hoffman.
An example of this receding can be found, I think, in the text of Zalmen Lowenthal.
But the truth is that one wants to live at any cost. One wants to live because one lives, because the whole world lives, and all that one wishes, all with what one is, if only slightly bound, is bound with life first of all. Without life, such is the real truth. And so briefly and clearly, anybody asks why, I shall answer. That is, and later for, and let them state, I am too weak. I was formerly under the pressure of the will to live, so that I should be able to estimate rightly. The will to live, but not, is at stake.
And I mentioned earlier that, as far as I can tell, none of the Sonderkommando willingly signed up for this position in exchange for better food and living conditions. Let me stress that the SS regularly lied to prisoners about the work or simply grabbed healthy-looking men from incoming prisoners. Philip Müller was grabbed after he was caught trying to drink some tea from a vat that had been lying around. But he recounted that one of his compatriots had volunteered when an SS officer said they were looking for strong men for pleasant work. Another friend was told that strong and healthy men were wanted for well-paid work in the Bada shoe factory 200 kilometers away.
Eagerly and suspecting nothing, he volunteered for this work. When a little later he was taken to the crematorium, he realized that he had been tricked, but by then it was too late.
Shlomo Venezia had only been asked if he had any skills in a trade or profession, and he said he was a hairdresser based on some experience in his father's barbershop. The closest I have found to a Sonderkommando with prior knowledge before signing up is Daniel Bennahmias. In his account, he states that he was sick and starving at the time of the selection, so he was desperate for better circumstances.
Rumor had it that the selection would be for some kind of steady job working with the dead, and that those chosen would be housed in a fantastic place to stay. Some said that they would hear the cries of women and children when they got there, and that they would be filled with horror. This too was part of the rumor mill. It shocked the men who were being prepared for what was to come, but Danny prayed to be chosen.
Now, with that said, when he did actually witness and understand what the work was, he was horrified. On his first shift clearing corpses out of the gas chamber, he fainted 4 times. On the subject of selecting members for the Sonderkommando, Primo Levi said, "At first, the SS chose them from among prisoners already registered in the lager, and it has been testified that the choice was not made only on the basis of physical strength, but also by a deep study of the physiognomies. In a few rare cases, the enrollment took place as a punishment. Later on, it was considered preferable to pick out the candidates directly at the railroad platform. On the arrival of each convoy, the SS psychologists noticed that the recruitment was easier if one drew them from among those desperate, disoriented people, exhausted from the journey, bereft of resistance, at the crucial moment of stepping off the train, when every newly arrived person truly felt on the threshold of the darkness and terror of an unearthly space." And the paradigm so often described of doing this horrid work in exchange for decent food and clothes, it should be noted that due to Action 1005, destroying the evidence of the crimes was of paramount importance to the Nazis. It behooved them to have strong, well-fed, healthy men who could manage this intense labor, and the alcohol they had steady access to was an opiate. It made them more pliable and willing to do the job. Every aspect of their seeming better circumstances was only for the benefit of the Nazis. As Primo Levi said, the special squads were largely made up of Jews. In a certain sense, this is not surprising, since the lager's main purpose was to destroy Jews. And beginning in 1943, the population of Auschwitz was composed of 90 to 95% Jews. From another point of view, one is stunned by this paroxysm of perfidiousness and hatred. It must be the Jews who put the Jews into the ovens. It must be shown that the Jews, the sub-race, the sub-men, bow to any and all humiliation, even to destroying themselves. On the other hand, it is proved that not all the SS gladly accepted massacre as a daily task, delegating part of the work to the victims themselves, and indeed, the most filthy part was meant to alleviate, and probably did, a few consciences here and there. The production of The Gray Zone was, by all accounts, pretty quick and pretty intense. The film was shot over 5 weeks in Sofia, Bulgaria in June of 2000. Despite the film taking place in October, Bulgaria was experiencing a record-breaking heat wave with temperatures over 100 degrees, according to Alan Corduner, which, in his words,
it added a physical discomfort to the emotional weight.
There was a pretty involved pre-production period where actors rehearsed scenes and were given extensive research and reading materials.
Tim had a great list of research material books.
Some were required reading.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so required reading?
Oh, yeah.
The Auschwitz-Birkenau set, the bunker, the offices, and the crematoriums were all built according to the architectural designs production designer Maria Durkovic found in the London War Library.
And she pushed me even further, and I really have to credit her. It was less important to me that all the buildings and the brickwork and the crematoria look exactly as they were. And she insisted that we build to the designs of the actual crematoria, which she found in the War Library in London. She pushed me really to go even further with it and furnish the film with a level of detail that I think really ultimately benefits it.
They built replicas of the number 1 and number 2 crematoriums at Birkenau at 80% to scale. They built a 100% to scale replica of the number 1 crematorium furnace room with 5 furnaces that were fully functional. Much of the grounds, interiors, undressing rooms, offices, and barracks were all built using those original architectural plans.
And she scoured not just Bulgaria, but all of the Balkans and into Germany to get reconstituted brick that would match exactly what that brick was. And the fencing and the roads and the sprinklers and the grass and then all the vehicles we got. You know, these people who worked on this movie, they put skin in the game and took it every bit as seriously as I did.
Cinematographer Russell Lee Fine worked with Nelson to create this dark, muddy look for the film. There was also an extensive use of handheld cameras because, as per Nelson's director's notes, we must feel dizzyingly that we're entirely inside the experience of these men. The camera is alive, present, and perspectives are rarely convenient or carefully framed. The scenes where the camera is locked down are rare and notable in their stillness. There are several scenes where the camera pans across a whole area, telling multiple stories with what passes through the frame. Nelson also spent a lot of time casting his extras.
I asked that I be able to meet every single extra who was in the movie because I felt that those faces and those looks were incredibly important. We would have meetings every morning in the parking lot of the production office, and usually about 100 to 200 people would show up over the course of 2 weeks. And I would meet every one of them very briefly and say, okay, this person should be a guard, this person should be a Sonderkommando, and these people should be on the train.
And that time paid off in a film full of distinctive, memorable faces. In the commentary for the deleted scenes, he praised the 250 women extras in particular, saying they were hugely committed, many of them having to shave their heads for the part. During production, they had to use a lot of practical effects, since computer-generated special effects were still in their infancy at the time. There are no computer-generated special effects in the film, so in a scene where a woman is shot in the face...
But she had to scream and scream and scream and scream and scream, knowing that somebody was going to blot that was shot from a straw off camera right into her cheek that could have gone into her eye. That's how we achieved that effect. That's our special effects supervisor was great. He did it.
Unfortunately, despite all the effort on display in this film, timing seems to be what killed this movie. The Grey Zone was set to premiere at the Toronto Film Festival on September 11, 2001. Due to the events of that day, the premiere was moved to the following day, and the film did garner some positive reviews, but Lionsgate, the film's distributor, decided to move the film's wider release to October 2002, in the hopes that audiences would be more receptive to the dark subject matter. But any positive buzz from the film festival was forgotten by this point. It got a pretty negative review in the New York Times, which criticized it for being too violent, and the film just largely went unseen. And the film was very purposeful about how and when violence was shown. We only see about 5 seconds of it inside the gas chambers while people are being gassed. Beyond that, we almost exclusively see the before and the after. The most violent scene in the film is one man punching another to death, and the lack of violence elsewhere in the film allows what we are shown to have so much more impact.
And so I just wanted those moments to be the right ones, and for those ones to stand out and make their points. We couldn't be excessive in other areas.
Another notable stylistic choice is the almost total lack of music. The title and credits have some understated score from composer Jeff Donna, but the rest of the movie is almost totally unscored with 2 exceptions. One I already described, the march into the gas chambers set to the music of Jewish composer Johann Strauss. The other is a moment of diegetic music when Dr. Nyiszli listens to a piece of German opera. But beyond that, the rest of the film is set to the ever-present hum of the Death Factory. In his director's notes, Nelson writes, "Since most scenes take place either inside or on the grounds of the crematoria, there will rarely be silence, and usually the sound of fans, machinery, or furnaces. In fact, such noise is nearly constant, so that the audience seeing the film experiences a varying but perpetual rumble. It must never be possible to forget that the Sonderkommando, whether sleeping, eating, working, or fighting, is inside the very organs of the most massive, lethal killing apparatus ever assembled, and that apparatus was at times deafeningly loud and never quiet." There are so many details like this that were handled with such care, so many elements that they worked to depict in the film in order to illustrate the oddity of the Sonderkommando's predicament. The contrast of a verdant green lawn and a truck full of human ash, the possibly exaggerated opulence of a Sonderkommando meal after a scene of bodies being burned. In the film, during this dinner scene, Rosenthal and Schlomo talk about the continued delays of their plans. Rosenthal is angry because it's their people at stake. And by their people, he means Hungarians.
That's because Hungary's the only country with any Jews left. Of course they're Hungarian. If we were burning Polish Jews, you wouldn't care?
If we were burning Polish Jews, we wouldn't be waiting, and that's my point.
Then Abramovitz comes in to update them on the situation. He talks about Sonderkommando being locked in and the SS planning to liquidate another section, maybe the Czechs. They talk about the food they've gotten from incoming prisoners and a nice necklace Abramovitz considers keeping. Rosenthal tells him to smelt it and then questions him.
We hear you got more machine guns.
Who told you?
Hoffman found out.
The two argue about whether Abramovitz was going to tell them and so on. Rosenthal again demands to know why they're waiting, and Abramovitz says they're coordinating because some are planning to escape. This infuriates Rosenthal.
Is that what you're after?
If I get the chance, fuck yes.
Abramovitz insists that they could live to tell what they've seen, and Rosenthal says they won't live. Schlomo says others from the camp might have made it out, but they won't let a Sonderkommando escape and live.
Well, we could tell. They'll turn Poland upside down.
He stresses that if they want to accomplish anything, they need a shared goal, and the priority is the machinery.
Then they can do whatever they want. All of you can run to high heaven. But after we've done the buildings.
There's some more bickering about trading that nice necklace for some wine, and then Abramovitz leaves. Rosenthal says Abramovitz is a liar and they're just a diversion. And Schlermer reminds him he's talking about Jews.
You keep saying that, Simon. You trust Jews anymore?
He goes on to ask how any of them could go back to a normal life after this. How they could look their loved ones in the eye after what they've done for a little more life.
For vodka and bed linens.
After that, we get another take that tells several stories. First, a Sonderkommando covered in soot steps out of the crematory, smoking a cigarette. As he walks out of frame, a line of emaciated prisoners is marched up to a wall and shot, one by one. One man tries to run and is shot down. In the distance, we see the pits where bodies are being burned. Up close, we see Rosenthal, Cohen, and many others heaving bodies into the burning pit. From there, we cut to Rosa being marched away by SS officers. Then one of the women's bunks is woken up in the dead of night by SS screaming at them. The women all begin panicking, and beneath the din of screaming men, frightened women, and barking dogs, we hear Dina telling Anya,
"You're gonna die anyway. We're dead. They'll find the powder. Don't say anything, no matter what they do. I love you."
Then we jump to the undressing rooms, where Cohen and Hoffman are telling new prisoners to get undressed for a shower, to hang their clothes on the numbered hooks and move quickly in order to be reunited with their families.
This process of cleaning and disinfecting is of vital importance to your health. One louse can kill you.
One man interrupts Hoffman, calling him a liar, saying he can't believe Jews are doing this. And Hoffman tells the man to listen to his wife and not cause trouble.
Look me in the eye and tell me I'm not going to be killed.
Hang your clothes on the numbered hooks and keep them separate from your neighbor.
The man follows Hoffman, telling him that he's dead already. Hoffman tells him to be quiet because he won't change anything, and the man says that at least he'll die with dignity. That's when Hoffman notices he's got a nice watch. He asks how the man got there with that watch. Between the ghettos and the train ride, Jews were constantly being stripped of their belongings. The train ride to Auschwitz could take days, and when the train would stop to refuel, SS officers would often demand a tax of various valuables in exchange for a meager amount of water or food. Sometimes they just threatened to shoot the train occupants if they didn't hand their items over.
What? The watch is what? They'd have killed your whole car.
Hoffman demands the watch, probably in order to smelt it and get more supplies for the rebellion, but he simply demands the watch, and the situation escalates until Hoffman breaks and starts beating the man, violently punching him over and over again while his wife screams in horror. Eventually, the man has been beaten to death and his wife shot. Then an SS officer silently removes the watch from the dead man's wrist and hands it to Hoffman with a smile. Hoffman, after a long moment of unspoken horror and self-loathing, takes the watch. Then activity resumes, and we get a shot from the point of view of a child following their mother into the gas chamber. The door shuts behind them, and we stare at Hoffman as the sounds of screams rise up, and people pound on that door trying to get out. Then we get a scene where a drunken Musfeld once again questions Nyiszli for information. He knows that Nyiszli went to sea camp to see his wife and daughter. He knows that Nyiszli brought blankets and medicine. He tells Nyiszli that sea camp is going to be liquidated because there isn't enough food.
We dispose of food.
So order is the order.
He tells Nyiszli he can save his wife and daughter if he passes on any information about the uprising.
Someone will speak. I want to know you'll help me.
If I'm spoken to.
From there, we see Anya sitting in the corner of a cell, sobbing. Across from her lies Rosa's dead body. We see Dina in another cell being tortured. Her captors are asking her about the powder they've been smuggling.
How did you get the powder from the plant? Where was the powder headed?
They try to manipulate her, saying what happens to the women on her block will be her fault, which is a lie, of course. It will be their fault. And she responds,
"Why don't you just guess then?"
Back in the crematorium, we see the Sonderkommando at work, sorting through the belongings of the dead and clearing the bodies out of the gas chamber. Hoffman is at work, untangling the bodies, when he finds a young girl. unconscious, but still breathing. She survived the gas. A lot of discussion around the Sonderkommando always comes back to shame, guilt, and blame. What they did in order to survive was abet and aid in the slaughter of their own people, sometimes even their own friends and family. What they did, willingly or not, was aid the Nazis. This leads to a lot of anger and a lot of shame. But it also causes many, I think, to disengage. A lot of Holocaust education is focused on survivors, which is understandable since they are the ones who can pass on their stories. As the Yiddish saying goes, Iber gekommen zores is gut zu erzählen. Troubles overcome are good to tell. But the rest is focused on the dead, who are often raised to an almost sainthood because of their systematic murder at the hands of the Nazis. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the discussions of Anne Frank. Anne Frank spent 2 years hiding with her family and several others in an attic. During that time, she wrote a diary. In August 1944, they were discovered. Anne died in early 1945 at Bergen-Belsen at age 15. The only survivor of the Frank family, her father Otto, published her diary after the war. The first version was published in 1947 and sold over 3,000 copies. It has since become one of the most widely read Holocaust accounts, and Anne Frank elevated to saint, commodity, and pop culture figure. A lot of fuss has been made over the edits to her diary, many of which have been removed in later publications and the edited portions put back in, but it should be known Anne actually edited her own diary. She heard on the radio that the Dutch government was planning to publish eyewitness accounts of suffering under German occupation after the war, and Anne wanted to be a writer. She rewrote many sections of the diary herself, removing sexually explicit content, being nicer about her mom, and removing some of the details of her romance with Peter Van Pels. In an article discussing Elie Wiesel's legacy in Tablet magazine, writer Ron Rosenbaum brought up Anne Frank and said, because of course, shortly after the upbeat, inspiring paragraph was written, or allegedly written by the young girl, her secret annex hiding place was ratted out by Jew-hating neighbors eager to please the mass murderers working for Hitler, all of whom were truly good of heart, of course. She was shipped off to Bergen-Belsen, where she died of typhus or execution by good-hearted death camp guards. In the article, The Holocaust Survivor Who Hated Anne Frank, the author Philip Graubart describes his friendship with a Holocaust survivor named Trudy, who knew Anne Frank when they were children and didn't like her very much. Arrogant girl, she snapped. Snobby, self-absorbed, typical German Jew. I didn't like her. Later in the article, Trudy goes on to say, but to me, what became insufferable was her optimism. I know in my heart that people are good. That was from her diary, yes? People are good? Do you think she believed that in Bergen-Belsen? She was just pissed off at Anne Frank because in her opinion, Anne got it wrong. People aren't basically good. For Trudy, the Shoah was never a rhetorical weapon or a political tool. It wasn't up for grabs to the loudest shouter. It was her personal story. To me, it felt like Trudy longed for Anne to have survived, just so that Trudy could have told her off, survivor to survivor, person to person. You see, the real Anne was just a normal girl, one with schoolyard grievances and dreams of being a writer, not a saint or a prop or a commodity to be printed on handbags and t-shirts, but a 15-year-old child who died, not because she was different, but because she was Jewish. When people learn about the Holocaust nowadays, it's so often treated as a metaphor for all genocides, for all bigotries, for all fascism. When it turns out, oversimplifying people's mass murder is a terrible way to educate anybody on any topic. It creates a generation that engages with this topic as a list of tropes more than as a traumatic historical event. It makes people comfortable with using the Holocaust to win whatever rhetorical debate they're deciding to have on any given day. It leads to people uncritically debating whether Jews in Germany owned a lot of banks before the Holocaust while playing into anti-Semitic stereotypes. Which, by the way, while we're on the subject, people talk a lot about the money-grubbing Jews, the old anti-Semitic stereotype of Jews who are rich and cunningly clinging to every last penny, using their wealth to secretly control governments and everything. But nobody ever talks about the penny-pinching Nazis, who were so cheap they were measuring the amount of bodies they could kill per serving of Zyklon B, how many bodies they could burn per pound of coal. Nobody ever talks about the petty, greedy, money-grubbing Nazi, do they? Maybe they should, instead of fumbling ass over kettle into reaffirming one of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes in the book. Approaching history with an oversimplistic lens is harmful to all parties involved. It leads to people being unwilling or unable to engage with the complexity of Holocaust victims and survivors. And surviving the concentration camp was not, generally speaking, beautiful or heroic. Sometimes it was just sad and traumatizing. Primo Levi wrote, "The saved of the lager were not the best, those predestined to do good, the bearers of a message. What I had seen and lived through proved the exact contrary. Preferably, the worst survived. The selfish, the violent, the insensitive, the collaborators of the gray zones, the spies. It was not a certain rule, there were none, nor are there certain rules in human matters. But it was nevertheless a rule. I felt innocent, yes, but enrolled among the saved, and therefore in permanent search of a justification in my own eyes and those of others. The worst survived, that is, the fittest. The best all died." The sanctifying of Holocaust victims and survivors troubled Primo Levi deeply. He stressed over and over again that there was no meaning in who survived and who didn't. The only common factors seemed to be luck and initial good health, nothing more. Shlomo Venezia discussed solidarity within the camps as a luxury that commandos could afford more than the average prisoner.
In the crematorium, you could indulge in solidarity, since we each had enough to survive. I'm not talking about helping a friend and taking over from him to give him a chance to recuperate. I'm talking about having enough to eat. For those who didn't have enough to eat, solidarity was no longer an option. So even when you had to take something from someone in order to survive, many people did so. We had enough to eat and were in a position to try to get food to others, even if this involved taking a few risks. For example, during the week, the men who went to fetch the soup for the Sonderkommando often left it on the way back for the prisoners working on extending the rail tracks. We left our pot, which was full, and took theirs, which was already empty. We didn't go short, since everyone in the Sonderkommando had enough bread and canned food. Even if the deportees arrived in the crematorium without their suitcases and not much in their pockets, there were so many of them that we could still find something to put aside. Elsewhere, this wasn't possible. Showing solidarity was a luxury that few could afford. A mouthful of food given to someone else was a mouthful less for you.
And that, I think, brings us to yet another of the many absurd contradictions surrounding the Sonderkommando. Given their slightly better circumstances, many could and did try to help others in the camp. And that circumstance was abetting slaughter every day for shifts of 12 to 15 hours. To be a member of the Sonderkommando was to be riddled with contradictions. Daniel Bennahmias recalls a Sonderkommando by the name of Kaminsky who terrified him.
Kaminsky, the Oberkapo at Crematorium 2, who was known to have stomped a Sonderkommando prisoner to death and would not hesitate to kick anyone who stood in his way, but whom Danny nevertheless sees in the changing room, comforting a little girl in his lap before she is taken to be gassed. Despite the harshness and yes, brutality of his conduct, there is something to Kaminsky, and, when given the chance, he will join in the revolt to blow up the crematoria.
When Kaminsky was eventually killed in the days leading up to the October 7th revolt, Filip Müller said the underground lost one of its best men that day. Shlomo Venezia recounted that on one occasion he recognized his father's cousin, Leon Venezia, in the undressing rooms about to be gassed. The man was little more than skin and bones, and so Shlomo asked if he was hungry, and when he said yes, Shlomo ran to get him some bread and canned sardines.
I rushed back over so as not to run the risk that he'd already have been gassed before I could get back with the food. I gave him everything. He didn't even take time to chew it. He swallowed it all as if it were water. He was so famished. Then his turn came to enter the gas chamber. He was amongst the last to go in, and the Germans started yelling. I took him by the arm as he continued asking me all those questions that I found so upsetting. How long does it take to die? Does it really hurt? I didn't know what to tell him, so I lied and said it didn't take long, it didn't hurt. In reality, 10 to 12 minutes gasping for air is a long time, but I told him lies to set his mind at rest, to reassure him. The Germans started shouting again, so we gave each other a hug and he went in.
One could have considered feeding this man a waste of resources since he was about to die, but it was humanity that mattered more. On another occasion, after a particularly difficult session of leading Jews into the gas chamber, Philip Müller attempted to end his own life. He followed the soon-to-be victims into the gas chamber and was stopped by a few young girls, one of whom spoke to him.
We understand that you have chosen to die with us of your own free will, and we have come to tell you that we think your decision pointless, for it helps no one, she went on. We must die, but you still have a chance to save your life. You have to return to the camp and tell everyone about our last hours, she commanded. You have to explain to them that they must free themselves from any illusions. They ought to fight. That's better than dying here helplessly. It'll be easier for them, since they have no children. And for you, perhaps you'll survive this terrible tragedy, and then you must tell everyone what happened to you.
As a last favor, the girl, Janina, handed him a necklace, asking him to pass it along to her boyfriend Sasha, who worked in the bakery. Once he left the gas chamber, Philip Müller was found by Kaminski, the Oberkapo at Crematorium 2, who told him,
You must not want to please our tormentors, he said. By dying without putting up a fight, particularly not now when we need you more than ever, you are still young, and it is vital that you should see everything, experience everything, go through everything, and consciously record everything in your mind. Maybe you are one of those who will one day be free.
All any of them could do, in the best case scenario, was survive to tell people what had happened. And for all the contradictions of the Sonderkommando, one must always remember it was the Nazis who created this entire scenario. They created the conditions that fostered all of this. They created the camps, starved the inhabitants, and alternatively worked them to death or murdered them outright. As Primo Levi wrote, here, as with other phenomena, we are dealing with a paradoxical analogy between victim and oppressor, and we are anxious to be clear. Both are in the same trap, but it is the oppressor and he alone who has prepared it and activated it. And if he suffers from this, it is right that he should suffer. And it is iniquitous that the victim should suffer from it, as indeed he does suffer from it, even at a distance of decades. He also wrote of the creation of the Sonderkommando as follows. Conceiving and organizing the squads was National Socialism's most demonic crime. Behind the pragmatic aspect, to economize on able men, to impose on others the most atrocious tasks, other more subtle aspects can be perceived. This institution represented an attempt to shift onto others, specifically the victims, the burden of guilt, so that they were deprived of even the solace of innocence. In fact, the existence of the squads had a meaning, contained a message. We, the master race, are your destroyers, but you are no better than we are. If we so wish, and we do so wish, we can destroy not only your bodies, but also your souls, just as we have destroyed ours. And the work the Sonderkommando did left a mark on every survivor of it. As Shlomo Venezia said,
Since then, I've never had a normal life. Everything takes me back to the camp. Whatever I do, whatever I see, my mind keeps harking back to the same place. It's as if the work I was forced to do there had never really left my head. Nobody ever really gets out of the crematorium.
While it was rare, people did survive the gas chambers sometimes. Shlomo Venezia recounted an incident where a baby survived the gas for a time before being shot. And when former Sonderkommando Dov Pasakovic spoke at the Frankfurt Auschwitz trial on October 8, 1964, he said it happened many times that people survived the gas. When such cases arose, the SS would shoot them. But Dr. Nyiszli was shocked and describes the Sonderkommando around him as being in an equal state of shock at the survival of a young girl.
I grabbed my instrument case, which was always ready, and dashed to the gas chamber. Against the wall, near the entrance of the immense room, half covered with other bodies, I saw a girl in the throes of a death rattle, her body seized with convulsions. The gas commando men around me were in a state of panic. Nothing like this had ever happened in the course of their horrible career.
It's possible that these Sonderkommando may not have been at Birkenau long enough to have seen this happen before. It's possible that even Musfeld, who had been transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau in June 1944 and had only been there a few months, hadn't witnessed a child surviving the gas before. In the film, when Hoffman finds the girl, he panics. He puts her body on the lift that goes to the crematorium and then races upstairs to grab her. Along the way, he bumps into Rosenthal and is forced to breathlessly explain.
There's a young girl on that cart who survived the gas. She's still breathing. She'll be burned alive.
With that, the pair of them set about getting her out of there. They have to convince Schlomo, who says it's an unnecessary risk that could ruin everything.
Forgetting what they'll do to us. She's not even conscious. You end it now, she goes the way she would have gone.
Meet us at the storeroom.
They get the doctor, who preps medicine for the girl while having a very interesting conversation with Rosenthal.
I was summoned.
Not by me.
To watch what amounted to a murder. Something I hardly need to be woken for in this place.
I'm sorry.
Then the girl is brought in and Nyiszli works to revive her. It happens slowly, painfully, but the girl eventually wakes up, coughing and spitting.
It's all right. It's all right.
Nyiszli tries to get her to speak to him.
Hello. What's your name?
But the girl never speaks. It's not even certain if she can. They talk about where they can hide her, and they end up moving her to a changing room. Then Schlomo and Nyiszli talk about their responsibility to the girl now that she's been revived and where they could possibly keep her. Schlomo says there's no time to hide her.
What?
There's going to be an uprising.
And he tells Nyiszli that they plan to destroy the crematoriums.
You'll all be killed.
The things that come out of your mouth.
He tells Nyiszli that it's been 4 months. Their time is up. And Nyiszli asks why he and the other doctors weren't told.
You know the sort of work you'd be doing, and you continue to do it.
I don't kill.
And we do.
I didn't say that.
Schlomo says what Nyiszli does gives their killing purpose. And Nyiszli says they're all just trying to make it to the next day. But Schlomo says he doesn't want to be alive when all this is over.
I don't believe that.
I know you don't.
Nyiszli says he can help, and Schlomo tells him,
You want to help? Get rid of this fucking girl.
It's around here that Abramovich shows up to tell them about the women from the Unio factory, but they've already been told. In the changing room, Rosenthal immediately demands to know why they haven't already mustered for the uprising.
Why are we still burning day after day? Because we've waited. Because suddenly this became about escape.
He's still so angry at the delays. He thinks Crematorium 3 is using them as a diversion so they can escape. Abramovich says they don't have to stay and die just because Rosenthal can't live with what he's done.
It's my fucking life. I hope I live till I'm 90.
And he tells them the others are ready to go today, between the shifts. Crematorium 3 will start the fire.
What about the girl?
Her? What about her?
They talk about trying to leave her outside the fence, shaving her head so she looks like a boy and can get absorbed into one of the camps.
She's not even numbered. Don't fuck this up for one life. You'll be shot on the spot and so will she.
Abramovich says she's not worth bothering with, that the gas got to her and Rosenthal should let this go.
Why are you even considering?
We don't kill people.
We don't? We put them in the rooms, walk them in and strip them. Look them in the face and say it's safe. What the hell is that?
Rosenthal says it's not the same, and Abramovich asks who put her in the gas chambers in the first place.
Now you think she made it through? God knows how. You're gonna be a hero?
Not a hero.
Not a hero, not a killer. What are you, Max?
Then he says he'll make it easy, and Max fights back.
I'll fucking kill you!
And Schlomo, the most pragmatic of them all, says,
We are not going to kill her, all right? I'm not saying we shouldn't have, but we're not going to do it now.
And it's about this moment when Hoffman runs in to tell them Musfeld is coming. They try to hide the girl, and Abramovich says he's dead if Musfeld sees him in the wrong crematorium.
He's not gonna know you. Just keep still.
Musfeld wanders in, asking why they were in there with the door shut. They say they were organizing for the morning muster, looking for a replacement for the man that the SS shot the other day.
Fine, who's going to replace him?
He is.
Nyiszli keeps trying to redirect him and get him out of the room so he doesn't see the girl, but Musfeld refuses to leave. He asks Abramovich why he's there.
How did you get over?
I was moved.
That's not true, is it?
Of course it's true.
And then Musfeld unceremoniously shoots the man who wanted to live until he was 90.
That's how it'll go for all of us. First you, then us. The last thing to do is smile.
Then he tells them to move away from the bench, pulling back the clothes that hid the girl from view.
Where did she come from?
And Nyiszli, who knows Musfeld better than the others, who has even the possibility of leverage, tells the others to leave the room and let him handle this.
You give orders now?
It won't help anyone if there's a row. How will the work get finished?
He tells Rosenthal and Hoffman that they want the same thing.
Save her.
Max,
You've got to fucking save her.
Shut him up!
As they leave, they take Abramovich's body to be burned with the others. As Musfeld watches them go, he muses on what he's seen the Sonderkommando do. Hurt people, lie, steal.
I never fully despised the Jews until I experienced how easily they could be persuaded to do the work here. To do it so well.
Then he prods at the girl, asking who she is, if she's related to somebody. Nyiszli tells him that she survived the gas and he has the information Musfeld requested. And they step out into the hall, leaving Hoffman to watch the girl. The pair of them sit quietly, watching each other. Finally, Hoffman walks over to sit across from her and begins to tell her everything.
We can't know what we're capable of, any of us. How can you know what you do to stay alive until you're really asked?
He tells her about an old man in his unit who, on his first day of work, had to burn his own family in the ovens.
2 weeks later, he took pills and was revived. We smothered him with his own pillow.
He tells her that he wants her to be saved more than anything.
You can hear me, can't you?
Out in the hall, Musfeld is demanding to know why Nyiszli is bothering to save one girl.
Your expertise has quintupled the torture.
I haven't.
Has quintupled the torture of children in this camp. That is fact.
He says if she is going to live, then somebody must die in her place.
To save her is a meaningless lie.
It's your lie, Herr Oberscharführer. We want the girl to live.
Musfeld says he'll spare the girl in exchange for information. And I love this scene because Nyiszli is being very careful with what he's saying.
There's going to be an uprising.
When?
I don't know. They don't want me to be a part of it.
Who told you?
The one you killed.
When Musfeld says this isn't enough, Nyiszli threatens to tell Mengele about Musfeld's drinking and his headaches. He says they'll want to see the girl shaved, numbered, and alive.
And to live isn't to kill, Herr Oberscharführer. Because we are not doing the killing.
And it's here where we catch up with Dina and Anya. We've seen a few flashes of them being kept in the cells or being tortured. Now they're out in the yard with their entire barracks lined up. The women are being shot one by one, and the SS interrogator tells them that it's all Anya and Dina's fault because they won't tell them where the powder was being taken.
I could say I don't want to be doing this, but that wouldn't be true.
He says all this can stop if somebody tells him what they want to know. Dina screams that none of them know, and the SS interrogator says their deaths are on her. And eventually they get to a younger inmate. She looks maybe 15 or 16 years old. Dina and Anya beg the soldiers to stop, and when they don't, Dina runs into the electrified fence, killing herself. And Anya runs at one of the soldiers, causing them to shoot her. And we are left staring at the bodies of the dead. From there, we cut to October 7th, 1944, around 3 p.m. In Crematorium 1, Hoffman tells Rosenthal and Schlomo that the girl is safe. Schlomo says the best thing they can do is go about their day quietly and wait for the signal. The pair tell Hoffman to head over to the 3rd to tell them about Abramovich. And in a moment that ruins me forever, Rosenthal cups Hoffman's cheek and tells him gently,
"And don't try to come back. We're not waiting for you."
He's saying goodbye to him with this, and it's such a mix of his usual harshness and something caring, it makes me cry. But Hoffman wants to tell him that the girl responded to him, that he talked and she nodded her head.
What did you say?
Everything.
Everything?
Hoffman says it was important because she'll know who they were.
And why does she need to know that?
I don't know.
That's right, you don't know.
Do you?
But this is cut off when Cohen sounds the alarm.
Fire! It's fire!
The uprising has started. Now, the revolt of October 7th had been planned and delayed several times. And to be clear, there are some mild discrepancies in the accounts because nobody directly involved survived the revolt. And also, due to the need for secrecy, it seems many surviving Sonderkommando only knew bits and pieces of the intended plan. Also, in this section, I'm going to be using the historically accurate numbering of the crematoriums. So it was number 4 that was set on fire, 3 in the film. Rosenthal, Hoffman, and Schlermer would have been in number 2, not number 1. I'll be changing the numbers in quotes from Dr. Nyiszli and Daniel Bennahmias just to make it less confusing. There had initially been plans for the revolt to happen in May or June of 1944, but it fell apart at the last minute, causing numerous deaths amongst the men. Many cite the Polish resistance outside the camp as being the primary ones to forestall any plans. Initially, those within the camps were hoping for outside help, but the outside resistance continued to delay, causing those planning on the inside to decide to move without them for fear they were running out of time. According to Shlomo Venezia,
the main part of the revolt was to take place in Crematorium 2. Every day at around 6 in the evening, SS guards passed by the main entrance to Crematorium 2 to take up their positions in the closed watchtowers where they spent the night. They marched in a relaxed fashion, unhurriedly, with their submachine guns shouldered, and we sometimes heard them laughing and joking with each other. The plan was just as they were passing, some men would open the big gate and jump out at the Germans to kill them and grab their weapons. This moment would be the signal for the revolt in all the other crematoria.
And Daniel Bennahmias stated that the signal for the start of the uprising was a fire in Crematorium 4. But finally, a day had been decided, about 2 weeks before October 7th, and those in on the plan were told the date and planned to go forward with it. Dr. Nyiszli, who did in reality know there were plans for some sort of uprising, was informed the day before. But on the day in question,
within 2 hours of the appointed time, however, an event occurred that brought everything to an abrupt halt. An unexpectedly tremendous number of German guards had arrived with a huge transport of Hungarian Jews and were to remain until morning. Even out of desperation, it would have been too perilous to go ahead, and under the circumstances, everyone was notified accordingly.
It seems not everybody knew about the plans for October 7th, but all parties agree it was not intended to happen when it did. Shlomo Venezia and Dr. Nyiszli both state it was meant to start at 6 p.m. that evening and instead started at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. But in essence, at Crematorium 4, the SS were selecting Sonderkommando for transfer. Shlomo Venezia found out later.
The men who were getting ready to stage the revolt thought the Germans were starting to be suspicious and wanted to eliminate them before the revolt broke out.
A fire started in Crematorium 4 when a mattress, or possibly several, were set on fire. Daniel Bennahmias said,
"A crazy Hungarian, totally unaware of the plot, had consciously set his pallet afire."
Shlomo Venezia's brother had heard that
the men of Crematorium 4 had set fire to the mattresses and thereby triggered the revolt before the scheduled time, convinced as they were that someone had betrayed them.
And Philip Müller just saw the flames from the yard out front as men refusing to go along with the SS selections for transfer and probable death began pelting the SS with stones, and the SS began shooting them down. Barrels of gasoline were used to blow up Crematorium 4 following the fire started inside. A story that comes up in pretty much every account I've read is an SS guard being shoved into one of the ovens while still alive during the revolt. Although details vary, Nyiszli and Bennahmias attribute it to a Sonderkommando in Crematorium 2. Müller attributed this action to Russian prisoners of war, and those who were able grabbed what ammunition they had gathered over many months to try and fight back against the SS who gunned them down with machine guns. Those who managed to escape were rounded up and killed. Around 451 Sonderkommando were murdered while 3 SS men were killed and 12 were wounded. Crematorium 4 burned to the ground and Crematorium 5 was too damaged to be used. Neither were ever rebuilt or repaired. On November 26, 1944, Heinrich Himmler ordered the crematoria at Auschwitz to be destroyed. The Sonderkommando were tasked with dismantling them, brick by brick. In real life, the girl did not survive to see the uprising in Birkenau after Nyiszli managed to revive her. When Musfeld found Nyiszli and the commandos with the girl, Nyiszli dismissed the others from the room, much like he does in the film, and he tried to reason with the man, explaining the horrors this girl had just experienced. He asked Musfeld to send the girl to the women's camp, but she had seen the inside of the gas chambers, of the crematorium. Musfeld said she was too young to understand the need for secrecy.
There's no way of getting around it, he said. The child will have to die. Half an hour later, the young girl was led, or rather carried, into the furnace room hallway. And there, Musfeld sent another in his place to do the job. A bullet in the back of the neck.
In the film, the uprising is exciting to watch, but it's also messy and frantic. When they blow up the crematorium, Schlomo yells above the din that everybody who wants to live needs to get out. He stays. Rosenthal and Hoffman go. From there, the fight is quickly suppressed, and those who are still alive are pushed out into the yard and held at gunpoint as they wait. Another memorable sequence shows, as the fight rages outside, Dr. Nyiszli hides in his lab, and somewhere nearby, a record player plays Johann Brahms' Alto Rhapsody Opus No. 53. But notably, in real life, Nyiszli didn't spend the uprising hiding under a table. He was in the middle of an autopsy for Mengele when SS officers broke into the room and rounded Nyiszli and his assistants up. They were beaten and shoved with the survivors of the uprising out in the yard. Only the timely appearance of Mengele himself saved Nyiszli and his assistants. Mengele pulled him out of there and sent him back to work. The scene of Nyiszli cowering is dramatically effective, but I saw it as one of the bigger historical departures. Alan Corduner said of the change.
So hiding under the table during the Sonderkommando revolt was something which Tim obviously felt would be pretty much the one time when we saw pure fear in Nyiszli. I think it allowed the audience to experience him in a different way.
And Nelson said that in his mind he didn't see a difference between performing a dissection for Mengele or hiding under a table.
I didn't consider it any worse or any better. I considered it trading one action for another.
But once the fight is over, Musfeld approaches Nyiszli, who asks if he'll be killed.
Do you want to be killed?
He says he told Mengele that Nyiszli did nothing, and that they can help each other.
You will continue with your work.
This causes Nyiszli to vomit. Musfeld watches him and smiles, saying they've saved each other, they needn't save anybody else. Outside, Rosenthal and Hoffman are being marched at gunpoint.
Why don't they kill us?
Did you ever see her?
No, did you?
Why am I asking?
Why aren't they killing us?
Then, in one of the most emotionally devastating scenes ever put to film, we see all the Sonderkommando that survived the uprising have been laid out. They're all lying on the ground as the SS calmly make their way down the line, shooting them one by one. Rosenthal and Hoffman are lying next to each other and have decided to use their last moments to just talk about before.
Where did they live?
Near the markets.
We would be neighbors.
They wonder what will happen to the girl.
They're gonna show her this, then let her live.
And then Rosenthal touches Hoffman's arm and tells him,
We did something.
Yes.
Then he says goodbye and is shot. Rosenthal is the last one, and he stares at Hoffman's body and simply repeats,
Neighbors.
After they've all been killed, we see Nyiszli and the girl surveying the carnage. Nyiszli quietly smokes, and the girl who saw all this happen just starts to edge forward. Out of fear or a need to escape, she just starts walking, and at first nobody stops her. The SS just watch as she takes off running. Musfeld takes out his gun, and we return to her point of view at the moment she is shot and killed. The final scene of this movie is the bodies being taken to the crematorium and burned as we hear one of the most astounding monologues I've ever heard. I'm going to read most of it, so just bear with me. After the revolt, half the ovens remain, and we are carried to them together. I catch fire quickly. The first part of me rises in dense smoke that mingles with the smoke of others. Then there are the bones, which settle in ash, and these are swept up to be carried to the river. And last, bits of our dust that simply float there in air around the working of the new group. These bits of dust are gray. We settle on their shoes, and on their faces, and in their lungs, and they become so used to us that soon they don't cough, and they don't brush us away. At this point, they're just moving, breathing and moving, like anyone else still alive in that place.
And this is how the work continues.
And this speech is fascinating for several reasons. One is that it was inspired by André Schwarz-Bart's novel, The Last of the Just. The novel is based around the Jewish legend of the Lamed Vav. It's based in this bit of Jewish mysticism that says 36 righteous people exist in the world at all times who are responsible for the fate of humanity. The novel follows one sort of family line of Lamed Vavniks, the last of whom dies in a concentration camp. Apparently, when he was writing the play, Nelson was struggling with the ending, and then he read The Last of the Just, and it all just came together for him. For context, here is the final passage of The Last of the Just. With dying arms, he embraced Golda's body in an already unconscious gesture of loving protection, and they were found that way half an hour later by the team of Sonderkommando responsible for burning the Jews in the crematory ovens. And so it was for millions who turned from Luftmenschen into Luft. I shall not translate. So this story will not finish with some tomb to be visited in memoriam, for the smoke that rises from crematoriums obeys physical laws like any other. The particles come together and disperse according to the wind that propels them. The only pilgrimage, estimable reader, would be to look with sadness at a stormy sky now and then. And praised Auschwitz be Maidanek, the Lord Treblinka. And praised Buchenwald be Mauthausen, the Lord Belzec. And praised Sobibor be Chelmino, the Lord Ponari. And praised Theresienstadt be Warsaw, the Lord Vilna. And praised Skarżysko be Bergen-Belsen, the Lord Janov, and praised Dora be Neuingame, the Lord Puskov, and praised. Another element that I find haunting about the final speech is the final line, and the work continues. There is a line in Nyiszli's book which contains the phrase, but it's very in passing.
Thus, the riot began in number 3. In number 1, work continued as usual till number 3 exploded. The sound of the explosion brought the tension, already at a high pitch, from the weight to a paroxysm.
The line would show up again in Shlomo Venezia's account, which was published in 2007. Chapter 4 is titled Sonderkommando, The Work Continues. When he was asked about what inspired that line, Nelson could recall nothing in particular, but I think this idea of work echoes throughout the writings about the Sonderkommando, because in the language of the Lager of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Sonderkommando were doing a job. What they were doing was work. And part of the Nazi lie was Arbeit macht frei. Work makes you free. Work was not paid. That is, it was slave work, Primo Levi wrote. Work ennobles, and therefore the ignoble adversaries of the regime are not worthy of working in the commonly accepted meaning of the word. Their work must be afflictive, must leave no room for professionalism, must be the work of beasts of burden. Pull, push, carry weights, bend the back over the soil. This too is useless violence, useful only to break down current resistance and punish past resistance. The women of Ravensbrück tell of interminable days during the quarantine period and before their incorporation into the factory work squads, which they spent shoveling sand dunes. In a circle under the July sun, each deportee had to move the sand of her pile onto that of her neighbor on the right in a pointless and endless merry-go-round, because the sand ended up back where it came from. I just find it haunting that the final note of the film is about the work, which continued after the death of those Sonderkommando. And after that monologue, the final text tells us that Dr. Miklós Nyiszli, along with his wife and daughter, survived internment, and Nyiszli lived until 1951, where he died of natural causes. Oberscharführer Erich Musfeld was tried in Krakow for his crimes in 1947 and sentenced to death. The sentence was carried out in January 1948. And the 2 ovens that the Sonderkommando destroyed in the uprising were never rebuilt. It is difficult to discern how much of an impact this action had. Philip Müller said it didn't make much difference.
Even if every gas chamber and every oven had been blown up, it would have achieved hardly anything. For the extermination techniques started by Moll had proved that crematoria were not of decisive importance. Pits would do the job just as well.
But they still tried to do something, to accomplish something amidst the living nightmare they inhabited, and that feat cannot be understated. I think the Gray Zone depicts their struggles in the most phenomenal way, showing us deeply flawed, complicated Jewish characters, a rarity in Holocaust media, and to a degree, media at large. I can't stop thinking about the sharp-edged Rosenthal who can be moved to such kindness, and the broken Hoffman who can be pushed to such brutality. I think this movie is astonishing. I think it teaches so much for any audience member willing to listen and be open. In an age where people love to use the Holocaust to win arguments on Twitter, I think a movie like this is important in reinforcing that this happened to real people. There are so many people who were lost, so many individual moments and stories that deserve to be remembered. I think part of the reason the Holocaust gets talked about so much, often inappropriately by people ill-equipped to have the conversations they try to have, I think it isn't because the Holocaust was the biggest atrocity in history, but it might have been the quickest. The number of lives lost in the matter of a few years is certainly what I think brings the subject up so much with every person who decides to compare abortions or vaccinations or something equally banal to the Holocaust. But it's not a metaphor. You know what's like the Holocaust? The fucking Holocaust! The word Holocaust is derived from the Greek holocauston, a translation of the Hebrew word olah, meaning a burnt sacrifice offered whole to God. The word Shoah is Hebrew for catastrophe, and the number 6 million is actually a low estimate of the Jewish dead. The number might be quite higher, but we say 6 million because everybody understands what that means. It has become a shorthand for talking about a Jewish catastrophe, an unwilling sacrifice sent up through chimneys to God. There are some historical experts who debate whether or not Holocaust victims include more than just Jews. That's not speculation I personally care to do. I figure anybody killed by the Nazis or at risk of getting killed by them is a victim of the Holocaust. Historical experts can debate that in the comments, but the reason I talk about the Holocaust so much, and I suspect many other Jewish people as well, is because in Judaism we are taught to remember and respect our history. During the holiday of Pesach, we tell the story of our escape from Egypt as though we ourselves escaped. We retell the story of surviving Haman, the miracle of the candles that stayed lit for 8 days. Every year we tell stories to remember and honor our past. And the 6 million who died tragically and systematically deserve that same respect. The Nazis may have disrespected their lives and their bodies, but we can respect their souls and their memories. It's the least we can do. Anytime I invoke the Holocaust, I do so with the spirits of 6 million hanging over me, and I invite you to do the same because the least we can do is honor the memories and not sling 6 million souls around to win petty arguments. While current events are not the Holocaust, the rhymes of history are what scare me more than open repetitions. There are groups today who are at risk, Jews among them, but others too. There are groups who are being targeted because of who they are, because of the color of their skin, because of their gender, because of who they love or what God they believe in. I'm not talking about groups who believe in some ideology. That belief is a choice. I'm talking about people being targeted for the marrow in their bones and the fire in their souls. People being targeted by actual neo-Nazis because of who they are. Trans people, non-binary people, intersex people, black people, indigenous people, disabled, Jewish, and Muslim people. So many people are at risk, and as the world gets increasingly divided, the rhetoric that this guy is a Nazi and that one is Hitler does nothing to help because it means so much is lost in the gulf between the reality and the rhetoric. At the beginning of Dr. Nyiszli's account, Austrian psychologist and former Sonderkommando Bruno Bettelheim muses on what made the 12th of 13 Sonderkommando units do what the other 12 didn't. By attempting a revolt, by destroying 2 of the 4 crematoriums in Birkenau and killing several SS officers, they died like men, according to the psychologist. I put that in quotes because when approaching the Holocaust and trying to understand, I think one absolutely must embrace multiple truths. It is true that the 12th Sonderkommando, to follow their parlance, did something brave and most of them died. It is also true that other Sonderkommando units were all murdered without a major uprising actually occurring, but that is still a tragedy and doesn't need to be viewed as cowardice. All the commandos led Jews and others to their death and then disposed of their bodies, all while living in slightly better conditions than most of the camp. And many Sonderkommando attempted suicide because this was too much to handle, and they wanted to at least have control over their own deaths rather than participate in the atrocity. And under the circumstances, I think that is understandable. Dr. Miklós Nyiszli was a Jewish doctor who assisted Joseph Mengele by performing autopsies and dissections largely of Jewish victims. This was to help Mengele's utterly flawed research into finding biological evidence of Jewish inferiority. Dr. Nyiszli also used his position of relative power to mitigate harm wherever possible, bringing supplies to prisoners in Auschwitz, and once, while attempting to save his wife and daughter, he told them to get any other women who would listen to sign up for the same work order, which helped them avoid execution. And I think to judge any of them, especially when gifted with historical hindsight none of them had, to judge the actions of the dead or the survivors, to see only the horror and not the humanity, is deeply callous. Instead, embrace the multiple truths, the horrors committed at gunpoint, and the small or big acts of bravery and compassion in between. That's all any of us can hope to do under similar circumstances. In the words of Rosenthal and Hoffman,
we did something. Yes.
The world is frightening and full of people motivated by hatred and greed, people who callously serve their own interests and strip away the rights of others. A world that feels perilously close to ruin. And if that scares you, then do something about it.
I don't think that God created the Holocaust. I think that God gave us a mind and a heart and a free will, and it is up to man what he's going to do with his life.
When I came to England, I got used to that some people refer to foreigners as a bloody foreigner, and that doesn't bother me at all. You can't call me a bloody Hungarian, I just smile. If you call me a bloody Jew, I kick your teeth out. That's how it affected me.
התחלתי לשתות ממש אחרי המלחמה. שליתי על הקבר הגדול, על החורבן. עכשיו קלוד רוצה לדעת מה הייתה הרגשתי, לו היה מלקק את ליבי, היה נרעל.
I said to myself, how can I do it? How can I? There was a Polish guy there, and I said, where is God? And says, God, this is what God is. You have to be very strong to survive. And I said to myself, the only thing I can do, that's why I don't remember a lot of things. I said to myself, I am a robot, and I did just this to my mind. And I said, from now on, close your eyes and do whatever is to be done without asking too much. How can you? There is no comparison about humanity. There is no such a thing.